The winter market glimmered like a snow globe come to life. Strings of warm golden lights looped between old iron lampposts, swaying softly in the cold December breeze. The cobblestone square was dusted with a fresh layer of snow that crunched beneath the boots of families wandering from stall to stall. Vendors called out cheerfully, advertising cups of steaming cider, knitted scarves, hand-carved toys, and sugar-coated pastries. Mara Ellison pulled her wool coat tighter around her as she guided her younger sister, June, through the crowd. The wind nipped at their cheeks, turning them rosy. June's eyes sparkled with excitement. Everything about the winter market made her feel like she had stepped straight into a storybook. But for Mara, the magic felt thinner this year. She was 22, old enough to see the bills piling up at home, old enough to know their mother had been working extra shifts at the diner to make sure there was at least a small Christmas for June. Mara had tried to help, taking on weekend shifts at the old library, tutoring neighborhood kids, but money was tighter than ever. Tonight, she had promised herself that nothing would show on her face. Not the worry, not the pressure, just joy for June. They walked past stalls glowing with ornaments and candles. Musicians played violin and flute near the fountain, the melody drifting through the chilly air like snowflakes. June tugged on Mara's sleeve. "Can we go see the gingerbread house display? Please? They said it's bigger this year." Mara smiled. "Of course. Lead the way." They weaved through the crowd until the towering gingerbread village came into view, complete with sugar-glass windows, icing chimneys, and tiny chocolate people. June gasped as if witnessing a miracle. As she leaned closer to peek at the details, her mitten slipped from her hand. Mara crouched down to retrieve it, and that's when she felt it, that strange, heavy awareness, the sense of being watched. She looked up. Across the square, standing slightly apart from the crowd, was a young man, broad-shouldered, hands in the pockets of a dark coat. Snowflakes landed on his black hair, but he didn't brush them away. His eyes weren't cold, but they were unreadable. He was like a shadow that had accidentally stepped into the light. Mara blinked, unsettled yet unable to look away. June tugged her hand again. "Mara, look, the bakery lady gave me a candy cane." Mara forced a smile, turning her attention back to her sister. When she glanced again toward the spot where the mysterious man had been standing, he was gone. They spent another hour wandering through the market. Mara allowed June to try roasted chestnuts, took pictures of her beside the giant illuminated sleigh, and even splurged on 2 small hot chocolates. But the whole time, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in the air. As they passed the lantern stall, a deep voice spoke beside her. "You dropped this." Mara startled, turning sharply. It was him, the stranger from before. Up close, he was even taller, his features defined and elegant, almost aristocratic. He held out a small knitted pouch she hadn't even realized she'd lost. Her name was stitched across the front, something her mother had made for her years ago. "Oh, thank you," she said, heart thudding. "I didn't notice. You were busy looking after your sister." His voice was calm, each word clipped with quiet precision. June, ever fearless, stepped forward and looked up at him. "Are you from the market? I haven't seen you before." Mara's breath caught, expecting him to ignore the question. But he didn't. He lowered his gaze to June and nodded slightly. His expression softened, just for a moment. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something, a small wooden charm shaped like a snowflake. He held it out. June's face brightened. "For me?" He nodded again. Mara stepped between them slightly. She can't accept gifts from strangers. June pouted. "But, Mara—" "It's all right," the man said quietly. "Consider it a simple gesture." Still, Mara shook her head. "Thank you. Really. But we're fine." His jaw tightened, not in anger, but something like surprise, as if people rarely refused him. He slipped the charm back into his pocket, without protest. June tugged on Mara's coat again. "I'm cold. Can we go home now?" "Yeah," Mara murmured. She guided June away, her pulse still racing. She didn't look back, but the man did, walking home through the quiet, snowy streets. Mara tried to convince herself it had been nothing, just a stranger, just a moment. But at the edge of the market, hidden behind the glow of the stalls, the man watched them leave, expression unreadable, breath fogging in the icy air. His name was Reed Trent, the son of a man whose name made criminals bow and politicians change their votes. The mafia boss's son, the one everyone ignored, the one who never spoke. Literally never spoke. Mute since childhood. People feared his silence. They feared what it meant, what it hid. But tonight, someone had looked at him without fear. A girl with snow in her hair and worry in her eyes. A girl who didn't know who he was. A girl who didn't know that in one brief glance, she had become the only person he wanted to understand. The next morning, the Portland sun was pale and low, spilling silver light across the frost-crusted sidewalks. Mara couldn't shake the image of the silent man from a night before, the way he'd watched her in June, the quiet attentiveness in his posture. Something about him had lingered, like a half-remembered melody. Meanwhile, Reed Trent sat in his apartment, staring out at the snow-dusted streets. He rarely let anyone see his apartment. Too many memories, too many secrets. But he couldn't stop thinking about the small girl who had looked at him without fear, who had smiled without knowing the danger lurking in his name. He wasn't used to wanting. Not like this. Not for anyone. At a bus stop on Division Street later that Saturday morning, the scene unfolded that would change 3 lives forever. Collins Briggs, a construction worker with broad shoulders and callous hands, held his 6-year-old daughter Abigail's hand tightly. They walked their usual Saturday morning route toward the farmer's market, Abigail chattering about her teacher and friends, the ordinary joys of a first grader. On the weathered bus stop bench, a young woman sat alone, her blonde hair tangled, her clothes worn. Tears streaked her face, her hands clutching a crumpled photograph like it might dissolve at the touch. She wasn't crying for attention. She was crying because grief had nothing else to do but pour itself out into the world. Abigail noticed her before her father did. "Daddy," she whispered, tugging at his hand. "That lady is really sad." Collins instinctively tried to steer them past. "I know, baby, but sometimes people need space when they're upset." Abigail didn't listen. She let go of his hand and walked toward the woman, determination in every small step. Collins froze, heart tightening, but he knew better than to stop her. "Can I hug you?" Abigail asked gently, her arms already open. The woman, Elodie, crumpled with fresh tears, but she nodded, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she let herself feel the kindness of a stranger. Abigail held her with fierce tenderness, patting her back softly. "My daddy says crying helps the sad come out so happy can come back in," the little girl explained. Elodie's sobs turned into something between a laugh and a cry. Collins approached slowly, protective instinct on full alert, but the moment felt sacred. "I'm Collins. This is my daughter Abigail," he said quietly. She whispered, her jaw tight. "Elodie." Abigail's eyes, wide and curious, scanned the photograph Elodie held. "Is that your mommy?" "Yes, she died 8 months ago." "Pancreatic illness," Elodie said, voice breaking. Today would have been her 54th birthday. Collins nodded slowly, understanding exactly what that loss felt like. "I'm sorry." "You get it," Elodie said softly. 3 years now," Collins replied. "Some days are easier. Most aren't." Abigail squeezed Elodie's hand. "My mommy went to heaven too. Daddy says she's watching us from the stars." Elodie managed a small, sad smile. They talked about loss, about grief, about the things that linger after loved ones are gone. And slowly, the tension began to soften. "Do you have somewhere to stay?" Collins asked gently. "The shelter, sometimes," Elodie admitted. Abigail looked up. "Daddy, she's hungry." "I know, baby," Collins said, decision forming in his mind. "Elodie, would you join us at the farmer's market? My treat." At first, survival instinct made her hesitate, but something in Collins and Abigail felt real, safe. "Okay, I guess I can." The market was alive with Saturday energy, vendors calling out, the smell of fresh coffee and pastries filling the air. Abigail ran between them, holding both hands, chattering endlessly about school, dogs, and her teacher. At the apple stand, something shifted. Elodie came alive, picking apples, showing Abigail how to judge firmness, color, and scent. Collins watched them, something warm spreading through him as he realized his daughter was laughing freely, and Elodie was enjoying it too. "Daddy, can we get donuts?" Abigail asked. "Yes, and you're getting one too," Collins insisted gently. Elodie hesitated, but took it. When she bit into the warm pastry, her eyes closed, a mixture of gratitude, grief, and comfort on her face. Sitting together on a bench, Collins made the decision that had been forming for the past hour. "Elodie," he said carefully, "I have a garage apartment above our detached garage. It's empty. Heat, running water, a small kitchen. It's not much, but it's warm. You could stay there." "I can't pay rent," she whispered. "I'm not asking for rent," Collins said. "I need help with Abigail, childcare, homework, someone to pick her up. You'd have your own space, your own life, but you'd be there when I can't be. Fair trade." Tears streamed down Elodie's face again, but these were different, hopeful tears. "I'll think about it." Collins wrote his number on a receipt and handed it to her. "Library on Belmont, 10:30 tomorrow. If you want to talk more, we'll be there." Elodie folded the receipt carefully, like a lifeline. Abigail tugged her coat. "You'll come tomorrow, right?" "I promise," Elodie said, linking her pinky with Child's. Sunday morning. The garage apartment smelled faintly of musk, but was ready. Collins and Abigail arrived at the Belmont Library, heart racing. The library doors opened. Elodie entered, clean, neat, hopeful. Abigail ran into her arms, and for the first time in months, Elodie felt safe. Story time passed, and afterward, they walked home together. "I want to say yes," Elodie said quietly, "but I have nothing to offer except my time and effort. I've been surviving on the streets." "Change isn't always bad," Collins replied. "Sometimes it's just different. 1 week trial. If it works, we continue. If not, we reassess." "Fair." "Yes," she whispered. "It's fair." Abigail danced between them, thrilled. And for the first night in months, Elodie had a bed that was hers, a roof over her head, and the promise of stability. The first week passed with small victories. Elodie helped Abigail with homework, cooked dinners, and even reintroduced laughter into their home. The garage apartment slowly became a true home. Painted walls, a small bookshelf, soft curtains. Months passed. Elodie began volunteering at the library and then got a part-time position. Abigail thrived in school, her confidence soaring. Collins came home to a house full of warmth, laughter, and hope. A year after that Saturday morning at the bus stop, Collins, Elodie, and Abigail had formed a family, unofficial but real. Gardens were planted, meals shared, bedtime stories told. Grief still existed, but joy had returned. One October afternoon, Abigail asked innocently, "Are you guys going to get married?" Collins and Elodie froze. "You like each other," Abigail said simply. "I can tell. Mommy would want this." That was all the encouragement they needed. Collins took her hand, leaned in and kissed her softly, then with certainty. Elodie returned it, tears in both their eyes. Abigail beamed. "Finally, I was running out of wishes." Months later, Collins proposed at the farmer's market where it all began. Abigail stood beside them as they celebrated love, family, and second chances. Elodie whispered to Collins at their small wedding, "The first best decision I ever made was listening to my heart. Second best was letting Abigail hug me that day. A single act of kindness had changed all their lives forever. A small hug, a shared moment of compassion. A family built on love, hope, and the courage to believe in second chances." And Abigail, wise beyond her years, always said, "Hugs fix almost everything." They were right.